So first, who am I? My name is Kyle Mathews, and I'm founder and maintainer of the Gatsby project, which is a React static site generator. And also, if you want to learn a lot more about Gatsby, I'm doing a 2-day workshop here in San Francisco next month, and then in May in New York City. So all of you should come. It'll be really fun. We'll go to hang out and learn more about Gatsby and front-end tooling and so forth. Yeah, so kind of want to start with like a nice big question. How does technology progress? Sub-question is like, related is how does the web itself progress? And also, related to that as well, it's like, if you're in technology for more than 6 months, maybe, you have to evaluate new technology that comes down the pipe. So people are always inventing new things, or developing new techniques, or new libraries, or new frameworks, or new whatever. And a large part of our job as technologists is to say, hey, should we move to that new thing? Is that a compelling enough difference to what we're doing right now that we should go through the cost of switching over? And so it's actually, I think, really important to kind of understand the process for which technology changes. And I think that's a really key part of making good, solid choices about what things to adopt and what not to adopt. Because often you can skip stuff, and it doesn't really matter too much. Cool. And kind of broaden this really far. I really like, I read this somewhere a while ago. Couldn't really find the source, but just to clarify, I didn't invent this idea. But anyways, that all progress of civilization depends on the impossible becoming arbitrary. So an example of this is penicillin. So before penicillin, if you got a bacterial infection, well, hopefully your body was able to fight it off, but there's a pretty good chance you might die because there really was nothing that doctors could do. You get a bacterial infection, something gets in your blood, something gets in a wound, and everyone starts preparing the funeral. But then in the early 20th century, penicillin was discovered. Then somebody figured out how to manufacture it at scale, and then all of a sudden, doctors all around the world had a very cheap, very effective way to treat bacterial infection, and the world was just completely changed. So what was before was impossible, treating bacterial infection, all of a sudden became arbitrary because now soon after there's other antibiotics discovered, and now a doctor has a whole slew of different antibiotics that they could choose to give when you have a bacterial infection. So something went from being impossible to now it's kind of an arbitrary choice. So which of these ones should we pick? So technology kind of goes through this process of something's invented or discovered, and then once the idea is okay, this thing is now possible, go through a phase of where people who want it, they either if it's a biological thing, they make it in the lab, or if it's our kind of world, you custom code something, and then at some point, it doesn't have to happen, but often technologies then turn into a product or kind of a common building block. So true story, screws used to be built custom to each project. This was a long time ago, but at some point, somebody invented a way of common, to just generate screws en masse, and then all of a sudden everyone could just use the same screws and things could fit with each other and whatever. So then anyways, they're products, they're building blocks, you can kind of assume they're there. They're things fit together. You can assemble a whole bunch of products and all of them are work well together and so forth. They're now building blocks that you can just anyways, so another case study is Dropbox. So Dropbox did not invent anything. The whole idea of syncing files between computers was it's an old idea, and lots of people have done it. But what they did do is develop a product that made it super simple to do that. You just install the application, and then voila, files are syncing. And in honor of, anyways, this Dropbox just filed to IPO, and so this is anyways why we need to talk about them, because honoring them, I guess, because it came a long ways. But anyways, when they first released the application, it's my all-time favorite Hacker News comment. The first commenter is I have a few cons with this app.
for a Linux user, you can already build such a system yourself quite trivially by getting an FTP account, mounting it locally with curl FTPS, and then using SVN or CVS and then mounted our file system. From Windows or Mac, this FTP account could be accessed through built-in software. It doesn't actually replace the USB drive. Most people I know. Anyways, it's just like a phenomenal example of like completely missing the point. Because when we invent something, all of a sudden, like something that was impossible is now possible. So there's like a lot of value that comes from that. Like our whole world changes when we know something is possible that we didn't know was possible before. And the same thing, going from something custom built to a product, it also opens up a lot of value because all those people who couldn't install those like software and make them run now have an easy way to sync files. And also, everyone else who doesn't really care to set that up now has like this like trivial way to sync files between computers. So there's a lot of value that comes from inventing something. There's a lot of value from creating products. Yeah, and so now, like 11 years later, there's like tons of similar products. It's kind of an arbitrary choice whether you go with Google Drive, Dropbox, Box, OneDrive, Evernote, and probably a dozen others that no one's ever heard of. But I'll do the same thing. So invention, building something is now possible if sufficiently determined. A product or kind of a common building block thing. It's easy to use, can install from NPM or by the service or product. So jumping into web stuff. So from 2011 to 2014, I was doing like front-end web dev at a company called Pantheon, and I was using Backbone.js and jQuery. This is what I built. Still looks kind of cool, maybe. Anyways, then after I left Pantheon, I started playing around with React. And I was just shocked at how many things it took care of. All these things that I had to write custom code for before were now just sort of, I didn't even like, they just like, I was like, oh, I should be doing something here. And then I was like, oh, but I don't have to, because React just kind of takes care of it. So a way to look at that is like, React is a much better building block for building UIs, which greatly simplifies development. So like before React, like at Pantheon, we did kind of component-like things, like we built sort of components. And jQuery and Backbone were really helpful for like helping us write the custom code to do that. But we had a lot of custom code to like kind of accomplish the same thing that React just gave us out of the box, and did it much nicer, and created a much nicer abstraction out of the box. And so React adds a lot of value by being a much, much nicer building block, a much, much nicer abstraction for doing what we want to do, which is like build components and compose components. And of course, render it to the browser and a bunch of other stuff. Another example is like, first time I used GraphQL, it felt the same way, that like all these complicated things I had to do to get data into my components from somewhere just sort of disappeared. We just had a whole talk on this, but it was just like using GraphQL really does feel magical if you're used to kind of more REST style of loading data, because you just have a component, you say, I want this data, the query that you pop into it, and then it just sort of shows up. And it's weird, just like all these, before all these things you had to do just don't exist anymore. And so this is how I came up with Gatsby, is I wanted to make a complicated problem disappear, which was, I love React. This was like back in like late 2014 or 2015. I was like, hey, React's amazing. I was like building some products with it. I was like, React's amazing, and I really want to build a website with React, but that's really complicated because you have to install Webpack, you have to set up Babel, you have to like, this, that, and the other thing, like you have to do configuration, all that jazz. And I was like, how cool would it be anytime I want to do a website, all I have to do is install something and like write some React components, run a build process, and then it's just done. So it turns, a little side project from like a multi-hour thing or multi-day thing if you're unlucky and go down some rabbit hole that you never quite, emerge from, to just like you immediately jump into actually what you want to do, which is, build a website. So I built Gatsby to hide all the complexity around, assembling these tools and building a kind of really fast website. So all that you have to worry about is your React components. And then, so with V0, that was like my goal is like, hey, make it really easy to build a website. With V1, which came out last July, V2 is actually coming out in the next month, the goal was then, hey, what are some other problems that we can just, make disappear and kind of wrap into the tool? Because the more I thought about it, I was like, we waste a ton of time when building websites. All that really actually matters, all that's because you think about what is actually unique to each website, and the only things that are actually unique to each website is the design, the user interactions, and your data structures. Every other thing is almost exactly the same. You have code, you load data, you need to host it somewhere, you need to deliver it to things, you have DNS. None of those actually matter, and they should just disappear. All we should be worrying about is the actual parts of each unique website. So all these different things, delivering the site, performance, data loading, etc. I was like, how can we create a way so those are just go from being this hard custom code problem to being arbitrary. You're like, oh, I want to load my data this way. I want to do this. I want to do that. Whatever. It's just you pick something, and there it is, and then you go on to the actual real part of your problem, which is the design, user interactions, and data structures. So Gatsby v1, we added plugin support for pulling data from remote sources. So now we have, so if you type here, for source plugins, there's now 62 different source plugins for WordPress, Contentful, for Drupal, for Faker. Anyways, Hacker News, MongoDB, Medium, Lever, on and on and on. So if you want to use Airtable to build a website, you just go to Airtable, put some data, install the source plugin, and then voila, it's in your Gatsby site. You don't have to do anything else. Yeah, same thing with image resizing, other optimizations like that. Anyways, the goal is make these things that feel impossible be arbitrary. So I have 5 minutes. So yeah, so quick run through some Gatsby stuff. So Gatsby has a plugin system, has all sorts of stuff, the source plugins, but also analytics, interaction. You'll do Google Analytics, Facebook Analytics, segments, whatever. A lot of sites are built with Gatsby now, namely, React.js switched over. And we do put a lot of work into making Gatsby sites just be really, really fast by default. So this is clicking around. It's all client side, all super fast. Here's workshop.me, we mentioned earlier. So doing some Gatsby workshops. This is a Gatsby site, naturally. But anyways, again, it just feels instantaneous clicking around. Yeah, so one big part about performance that a lot of people say, oh, we should be doing this, but then in practice it's really hard to do. That Gatsby again just kind of builds into the framework is code splitting. So if you look at the network tab, this is running locally, and then we switch this down to JavaScript. You can see that it's has all these different code splits. So, you focus on writing React components, and then as your site grows, Gatsby automatically splits out each and all the new code you're adding into new bundles, and then lazy loads those as you click around the site. Talked about, let me slow it down so you can actually see it. So Gatsby image is a React component that ties into the Gatsby build service. So you can get blur up and other kind of image placeholder effects and lazy loading. So if we load this and then slow it down to 3G, and then click on blur up, you kind of get this right away, but then as the image comes in, same thing down here. And this is really, really trivial to get going. If you look at the docs, it's here's a really simple example. You have, you import the component, and then you just call it. And then, anyways, down here is where so here you have a GraphQL query that you just say, the image that you want, and then you have a query fragment, and then you say the width and height, and then it processes the image, creates all the different size thumbnails, for retina screens and so on and so forth, and then it just goes in here, and it's super simple. If your design changes and you're oh, we need a 250 wide image, you just update the query, and then everything updates. So another, let's see. So another cool thing is just kind of the lazy loading. If we look here, you can see, actually here, let's go better examples. Yeah, so if you go to Gatsby.js, for example, and then load the site, and then we clear this. And if you scroll down the page, you can look at the network tab. As different links get exposed. Oh. This is running off my phone. This is maybe not a good idea. Yeah, JavaScript hasn't loaded yet. It's just kind of stalled. OK, anyways, it should be lazy loading these. OK. Let me try to go back. OK, so we clear this. Yeah, so as we get down here, you can see it starting. As links show up, it goes out and fetches the data and the code that's necessary for that page. So it tries to strike a balance between, loading as fast as possible and then never having any delays on the client, but also not fetching your whole site, all the JavaScript and data for your whole site. So it's kind of like, it's like one of those exploration games, you're like, the map is dark, and as you go around, it kind of lights up. It's the same thing, kind of it just pulls in different sections of your site as you're going around. So I think I'm out of time. But yeah, Gatsby, you should use it for your next project, and you should sign up for the workshops. And, glad I could be here.